I'm Sandy. Thanks for joining me today. This past spring we planted a good-sized garden, and even though we didn't get a lot of time to work on it because we were working on our camper trying to complete that project, the Lord blessed us and gave us a very, very good harvest. Usually corn doesn't grow very good in northern BC because of the shorter growing season, but we thought we would give it a try and plant it anyway. And so we had a really good harvest. I had two good pickings off of it, and the first picking we got around 90 cobs and the second picking was around 70 cobs. So we were very blessed with our corn, and I think we'll try it again next year and see how it turns out then. We also planted squash. These are just two of the crops that we planted, but we put in one package of squash seed. I think it has about 12 to 15 seeds in a package, something like that. I couldn't say exactly, but in the end, out of those few seeds, we ended up with 70 squash. And so we were just blown away by such a huge harvest. But we knew that we had to do something with that squash because squash doesn't generally last longer than about 3 months once it's harvested. And so you have to put it in a dry, cool place. That's where squash likes it. It doesn't like a root cellar. They tend to not do very well in root cellars. But we put it in a dry, cool place. But by the mid-December, because we harvested in September, we were starting to lose it, so we had to preserve it. A good friend of ours told us a couple of years ago how she preserved her squash, and what she did was she would cook a squash, and then rather than eat it for days and days, she would just take and preserve the leftover squash. She would put it in little patties and then freeze it in single portion sizes and then just take out what they needed. And so that's what I want to show you today, because that's what I have been doing with our squash. When you have a large harvest of any kind, it doesn't have to be overwhelming. What I generally do is try to put it into priority, like the corn had to be dealt with before the squash, of course. So the squash could sit, and I did let it sit. When I cooked squash, I would try to cook up 3 or 4 or 5 at the same time, and then I would put away the leftovers into the freezer and then bag those afterwards. But as December came closer, we started to lose them, and I had to work more diligently. And so I started doing it in larger work projects, and so now I was up to a laundry basket per work session on this. And so that's what I'm on, is my very last laundry basket of squash, and so that's what we're going to be working on today. The squash all need to be cut up and then all the insides of them scooped out. So you're just going to scoop that out. You just want to make sure that they're good and clean on the inside. We'll wash them at the end after we're all done, but you just want to kind of check them over for any bad spots, any rot, and you're going to want to cut that out. But so far this one looks good, so we're just going to move on and carry on and do a bunch more. Once you have your squash all scraped out in the centers, you just give them a quick rinse. They've been sitting for a long time in their basket. You just want to get the dust off them so they're all clean. I just use a clean cookie sheet without any parchment paper or anything on it. And then I just turn them face down. You can have them face up if you want. I find that they dry out a little bit that way, and this way they do retain a bit more moisture. Okay, I'm going to put those into the oven. I put them in the oven at 350 and I set the timer for an hour and a half. Depending on your oven, you know how hot it gets. This one is a little bit cool and so it takes a little longer, but you're just going to cook them until they're soft all the way through, kind of like a baked potato. Same idea as that. We're just going to check and see if these are done. And you just give them a poke and they're very soft. The knife is going in very well. So we're just going to let those cool for about half an hour. We're just going to scoop out the squash, the nice tender meat from the inside of it. This is the messy part. So the squash has been taken out of all of the shells that it was in, and then now it's just ready for mashing. And so before I mash it, I just like to add about a quarter a cup of cane sugar, just because this squash is a sweet squash, and I just like to add to the flavor of it. You can put butter in this if you want to. Put about a quarter of a cup of butter, or olive oil, but you can add a quarter cup of butter if you'd rather that. We're just kind of going heart healthy here. And then about a teaspoon of salt. And that's all I put in there. And then just mash it. And it's kind of had a little bit of mashing already, but we just want to get this all blended in. There was more squash than bowl, I see. I should have used a bigger bowl. You just keep combining it all. Okay, so from this part, we're now going to just put it through. You don't have to from this. You can take and put it straight into the freezer if you like, but I like to run it through, put it through my KitchenAid. So we'll just get that ready and move to that next step. We're just putting the squash into the KitchenAid. I'm going to give it a good mix in there. And I fill it probably half to 2/3, something like that. I don't put any more spices or anything in it at this point. I just want it to be nice and creamy, which is the point of the olive oil. You don't have to add any spices to this at all. It's very good all by itself. So we're just going to get the KitchenAid started. And it likes to splatter, so we're going to put a cloth around it. It doesn't take too long. Okay. But it just has a much creamier consistency when we put it through the blender. This is a bit of a drier squash, and some people really like it to be much drier. We like it to have a little bit of moisture in it. But I don't know if you can just see the difference in the texture. It's a little bit creamier for sure. Okay, we're just going to repeat this process until we get it all going through. So we'll get back to you on the next step. Okay, so we put the squash through the KitchenAid and it's ready to be put on the cookie sheets for freezing, because that's the next step. And so all we're going to do is we have a half cup measure. You can use a quarter cup if you have a smaller portion size. But really you just kind of get them out. I use a little spatula. And that's all I do. They just form little hockey pucks, really. You can do this same recipe with mashed potatoes. And just if you have leftover mashed potatoes from supper, you had a crowd over or something, or you just want to have some for yourself for later, you just do exactly the same process. You make your potatoes, you mash them, and then you get whatever portion size. This is half a cup again, but you could use quarter of a cup or a third of a cup. And then just put them on wax paper on a cookie sheet and then just freeze them. I don't cover them, I just leave them this way. And they turn out really, really good. So we're just going to carry on and fill both of these trays. There'll be more, there'll be extra that I'll have to freeze tomorrow. So we'll do that tomorrow, but we'll get these 2 trays filled and then we'll be back. So we've got all of the squash put into patties, into half cup patties, and we've got 2 trays full, and they're going to go into the freezer for the night, or they can be even for a couple of days if we want that. The leftover is just going to go into the fridge overnight, and we'll cover that, and then we will do the same thing with this as we did with that. So this will end up on a cookie tray in another day or so, and then we will show you the next step tomorrow. After your squash are finished freezing, here they are, all the little hockey pucks. We're just going to take them out of the freezer and bag them and date them, and we'll do that next. There's different ways to cook your pre-frozen squash, and one of the ways I find the easiest is to put it in a casserole. Dig out how many ever patties that you're going to need for your family that you're going to be cooking for, and put them into a casserole dish. You don't have to oil it or anything, just put them in there. There's a lot of moisture in them already, and then just cover with foil and put in the oven. I usually put it in still at 350. You can put it in 300 if you have a little bit longer time, but between probably around 30 minutes at 350. Check it at 20 minutes and just put a knife or something into it to see if there's any frozen spots in it, but you want it to be steaming and hot. And so that's how you can do a casserole. I find that is the simplest, but if you're in a hurry and you would like your squash sooner, I don't use a microwave, but I just use a little frying pan, and I put it in the little frying pan and add a little bit of water to it, cover it with a lid, turn it on kind of a medium heat, and I check it regularly. So once it's heated through, whether it be in a casserole or in the pot, you can leave them in patty form. They kind of go a little soft and they spread out, so they're not as pretty as they are when you first put them in. But you can use a fork and just mash them all together, and then you can put it in a serving bowl from there and put it on the table, and people can just scoop out what the portion size they want. That works very well. Also, if you want to use squash in place of pumpkin, you can do that. You can substitute it. And so in my case, I mentioned that I did put my patties in half-cup serving sizes, and that's very easy for measurement now when I want to use a recipe. My pumpkin pie recipe calls for 2 cups of pumpkin, so I could go in and dig out 4 patties of my squash patties, let them defrost. I can put them in the fridge the night before, and use them the next day, or you could put them in the microwave if you have a microwave to defrost them. But that's all you have to do. So it can substitute for making pumpkin cookies or pumpkin pie or pumpkin soup. Whatever you use pumpkin for, you can also use your buttercup squash for. Thanks again for joining me. We'll see you again soon. God bless.